Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, for another special episode, another therapeutic episode, most likely. Returning guest and member of Flyers Nitty Gritty, Vasili, oh my God, I want to say this right, Gianarakos. Gianarakos.
Oh, you're getting it better every single time. Like that was perfect.
Perfect. All right, cool. Because I remember it was Gianarakos. Anyway, and sister podcast and friend of the show and part of Flyers Nitty Gritty as well. And he has his own podcast, successful podcast, OMB Podcast. Welcome back, Isiah. What's going on, buddy?
Hey, how you doing? So we're a sister, we're not a brother podcast? Come on.
It's a city
of brotherly love.
You're absolutely right. Correct.
Nothing wrong with sisters, but, a tie is like kissing your sister. All right, go ahead.
All right, this is already starting off in a great episode. Thank you so much. First, let me give a shout out to the sponsor because I'm going to forget. Shout out to Jim Steaks on South. That's on 3rd Street. Make sure to get some cheesesteak, chicken cheesesteaks, whatever you need. They're like one of the best cheesesteaks in the city. So please make sure to check them out. They are Flyers fans that support us because we're a Flyers media site. So get some Jim Steaks. And also please like and subscribe to the podcast. Share it if you can. It's a humongous help to us. All right, gentlemen, we got a lot to talk about. Prior to this, Vasili and I were on here kind of venting, as the entire Flyers community has been doing, rightfully so. And while I don't agree with everybody's take, I agree with everybody being frustrated and having the right to pretty much throw anything you want out there at this point, because we've seen so much chaos at this point that to say that you really know what's going on, you probably don't. But within all the craziness, maybe there's some theories that are accurate. So we're probably going to go through our theories here today. And let's just get into it. Let's start off with the coaching changes, and then we'll get into the game itself that just passed, where the Flyers lost 7-5, again, for their 9th loss in a row. And I think only 2 of those losses, and you guys can correct me, were in overtime. The rest were all in regulation. So that really sucks. And a lot of them were embarrassing as well. So just the icing on the cake there. Isiah, I'm going to open it up to you first. AV and Terrian are out. If anybody listened to the last episode, Vasili and I definitely attacked them the most. And then ironically, Mike Yo is safe at this point. I'll give my own theories in between, but what do you think, Isiah? What were your thoughts when you saw AV and Terrian kind of get the door?
Well, something had to happen. I mean, it was clear that after the 20-game mark, Chuck Fletcher comes out. It's at the quarter mark of this season. He says, well, we started out okay. These last 10 have been rough. But if you take it on balance, we haven't had some of our best players. And, a little patience is in order. We're not gonna panic. We want to improve in certain areas, and we're mindful of that. And we're all responsible for what's going on the ice. It's not just the coaches. It's not just the players. I'm part of that too, blah, blah, blah. Then they play 2 games and get waxed 11-2 combined, right? So here's my theory of the case. The theory for me is this. Alain Vigneault has never been sane since the pandemic bubble.
Okay.
He never really recovered. And last year, he looked like he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be here. So he was giving it the college try this year, and if things kind of went well, he could kind of maybe recover and get his second wind. He never did, and it started falling apart for a variety of reasons, and he was really a dead man walking. It reminds me a little bit of Peter Laviolette when he got canned in favor of Craig Berube. If you remember that, was that 2013? It was over. And I think you have to look at Chuck Fletcher and say, how come he didn't see this? It was pretty clear if you read between the lines. He wasn't crazy about the coaching staff and their job that they did last year. And then I'm thinking, on the other hand, well, in 20, AV was a runner-up for Jack Adams. So after one bad year and one good year, I could understand why he didn't want to that would be a bad look for the organization. But my gut feeling was, unless things really went well for the Flyers, AV was spent here. So what happened really against, and this is against, I think, Tampa. If you wonder what's wrong with the Flyers, I hope this will show up on the screen. Maybe it won't. Is this showing up?
Kind of. It's get a little closer. I think it looks all right. We can see. Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay. This is what they call a heat map. A lot of people make fun of these. But this is the Flyers playing Hackstall hockey again. Notice how Tampa is around the net like nobody's business. And the Flyers are taking most of their shots in the perimeter.
Yeah.
See, and this has been a problem. This speaks to their desire, their will to go to the dirty areas, and the idea that the message is they're just kind of going through the motions. Because guys that really want to win get to the net. There's no coach that teaches you to shoot from 5 feet from in the blue line. And I just, so it was over. It was time for a change. I don't know what Yo can bring, but we can get into why he stuck with Mike Yo. But that's my theory of the case right there.
All right. Well, we'll get into the Mike Yo thing. I like the way you opened that up. I think you hit on a lot of things, and Vasili, I'll let you go in a second here. Sure. Definitely. I think Fletcher was doing what he's supposed to do. Be responsible. Don't react. Don't panic. Right? Like, don't assume the worst immediately. Like, you got to be a little more patient in the fan base. And to his credit, he was slightly more patient than us. But I said this before. I think he lost the team last year. I think he never got the team back. I don't think it was necessarily in the playoffs around the bubble, but I think when we saw those games against the Rangers, I would say it's even worse than what we saw this year. But we saw a team that really could not care less that he was behind the bench. Like, they were not listening to him at all. The team did not show up to play that game. And that was my first sign. And I was saying it on the podcast, you need to fire this coach now. I was like, you can fire him at the end of the year because the season's lost anyway. I was like, but he lost his team and they're gone, and then they go out, they bring all the new veterans. And anytime I see a coach, and again, he didn't do it publicly, so I give him credit, who starts blaming the individuals in his life, like, oh, I don't have this, I need this, I need that. That's usually the first sign that you're probably the problem. Not because you don't have the things, and maybe you do need a little bit better at this, but a great coach or a good coach, at least the one that fits with the team, he will get the most out of what he has. And he won't necessarily be searching and be like, oh, well, Ghost doesn't fit my system. And now Lindblom doesn't fit. And Patrick doesn't fit. And Myers doesn't fit. And it's like, okay, well, who does then, right? So that's where I kind of see that stuff. And that stuff scares me. Vasili, I'll let you chime in here.
Yeah, so just with AV, you have to be a coach that is able to adapt in a certain sense. And I just think he did not have the ability to adapt with the players that he had.
Not the first time. Sorry to cut you off. But
yeah, exactly. Not the first time where he hasn't adapted. I mean, we've seen that in the past with the Rangers. But it was really just what you and Isaiah were saying. It was just time. You could see that the players were tuning him out. They weren't listening to him in terms of what he was trying to get them to do on the ice. And they really weren't ready to go through a wall for him. And do you really want a coach behind the bench that the players aren't interested in playing for? It's not going to result in much success. I mean, you had a press conference last week in which Chuck Fletcher essentially comes out and defends his coaches, says they're not going anywhere, and kind of put this squarely more on the players. The players come back out the next night and they don't do very well, and the losing streak continues, right? So you see a team that's not motivated against the New York Rangers. They lose that game, and then they come back, have a bunch of practices actually, where they're thinking, okay, we get our practice time in, we're going to be able to start to right the ship, and they get drubbed by Tampa 7-1. So you could just tell the team as a whole, like, they did not have the mentality or the fighting mentality that they needed to get out of this, at least with Vigneault behind the bench. There just wasn't enough collective, going to the net, as you guys were saying, and just enough people wanting to bear down and get dirty and try to win games. And it's a results oriented business. You lose 7 in a row, 8 in a row actually, in a market like Philadelphia. Most coaches aren't going to survive that. So it was time. And as we saw, that came out some tidbits earlier this morning, I think from Frank Saravalli on Twitter, that Dave Scott, after he saw that 7-1 loss, it was time in his eyes even as well on Monday morning for something to be announced in terms of a firing. So just all around, AV's tenure here, he had a good little first start, but he just wasn't able to recover after what happened last season. And I think that speaks to the fact that the players just weren't really listening to what he was trying to get them to do on the ice.
Yeah, no, I think really well said. And actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Dave Scott is the reason that the trigger was pulled at the awkward moment of, hey, we don't have a coach ready. We have a game the next day. And I think Chuck Fletcher would have given him the extra day even to just, hey, let me figure this out first. The way I understand Comcast, they're not waiting. Like after that game, because I actually think he should have fired him before that Tampa Bay game. And they hesitated, and they're kind of like, yo, Chuck, pull the trigger here. And Chuck, one thing he does better than Ron Hextall, and I think this is why he's going to keep his job longer than well, not longer, but necessarily will keep his job, is he's better at communicating with ownership. And I think that's clear. He's much better at responding to it. He's less prone to just do his thing.
It's a close circle that Hextall had, apparently, where it's just like him and two other guys.
Absolutely. I think that's why he was fired, by the way. I actually don't think it was the Hextall reason. I think it's because he refused to communicate with people outside of Paul Holmgren. He didn't want to talk to anybody else that wasn't a hockey person. So they're like, okay, those are the bosses. They're like, get rid of them. I still respect Hextall, but actually I respect AV too, quite frankly. Let me just bring this up, and Isaiah, I'll let you respond, and then Vasili, you can respond to this as well. I actually think that this is rooted in Michel Therrien. Anybody who knows me and has listened to this podcast long enough, like, I never liked Michel Therrien. I didn't like him when he was coaching the Penguins. I didn't think he was a good coach then. I didn't think he was a good coach when he coached Montreal Canadiens. I never liked him. And if you guys want to do the research, and again, don't judge him just based on one video. This is not me off of one video, but if you want to go look up a video of him talking to PK Subban and the way he talks to him inside of the locker room, I remember watching that and I go, if I had to work for this guy, I would not want to. And again, it doesn't mean other coaches aren't doing stuff like that. And I don't necessarily think it makes him a bad person. But we're talking about communication. You're talking about getting people to buy in. And I would say ever since the day Michel Therrien took over here, the power play has regressed every single year, getting to the point right now where it's bottom of the league. And even just losing him for the day, the power play looked better. I think his system was completely inadequate. I love the heat map that you showed there, actually, because I think it's a lot of it is obviously not just the power play. But you look at the way the power play has been working and the lack of shots from the slot, the opportunities from behind the net. There's nothing there. It's like watching somebody who sucks at NHL 22 and all they do is get it back to the point and try to shoot it because that's the only thing open. It's literally how I saw his system play out. I think he's a very tough individual to work with. I think AV is a little bit easier. But the fact that they're buddy, I don't think Therrien was going anywhere under AV. And I think that's why we saw what we saw today. I think Mike Yeo is a much more likable person overall to work with on a daily basis, especially when things get frustrating. And from what I understand, and this is credit to Charlie O'Connor, so I don't want to take credit for this. From what I understand, listening to him, he was saying that the players actually requested that Mike Yeo stay, which I find very interesting. My sense always was that AV is a good coach, not Mr. Nice Guy, but at least he's smart and charming. And Michel Therrien is a nightmare to play under. Isaiah, what do you think about what I just said? Have you heard anything of your own? Do you think that sounds valid? Are you even satisfied with the way things played out?
Well, I mean, I've heard people speculate on that. I think Saravalli, going to what Vasili was saying, was talking about how players were thinking that AV was delegating too much with his assistant coaches, wasn't communicating. Who are the? I mean, I'll get back to Therrien. I'll make very short work of him. But who are these players that haven't won jack shit to say worry about this coach is not doing this and that's good? They're shooting from like 5 feet in the blue line. I mean, really just, I watched 52 years of Flyers hockey. I've never seen so much. We go through one coach, we go through another coach. All right, let me go to Therrien. Therrien's the kind of guy you hire back in 1977. When you have an expansion team, you have no talent, the league is very small, and you try to play a trap and you try to limit the beatings because he's just going to play like a 1-3-1 or something like that. He's strictly a defensive coach. The idea that he was going to coach power play and he was going to work with the forwards, to me, always seem ass backwards. So I mean, I think it's putting people, players, and coaches in the right position. So I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that AV was willing to lose his job because he didn't want to fire his buddy French Mike. I don't think AV liked being here anymore. He didn't want to get fired. It's a, ignominious distinction as it may be. Everybody gets fired. I don't think Turian was the difference between AV being here or not. I don't get that. I think AV's problems are AV's problems. So, but Turian never made any sense. And yeah, I'm very familiar with him yelling right in front of teammates and like right in the middle of the locker room, showing video. It's like, you're doing this and you're not doing that right. And like, this guy's a schmuck. He's meant for lower levels of hockey or like the Swedish league or this over in Switzerland. His time is long past.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And let me clarify what I did say, because I agree with your premise there. I don't think that AV was fired because of that, but I want to go back to what Saravalli said, where AV delegates through his assistants. Right. And if the only way to get to AV is through Michel Therrien, that's where I think I think it's another issue where like your forwards are struggling and the barrier to talking to the coach is Michel Therrien, who is not very good at offensive systems, and also is a poor communicator. And I think AV is a better communicator. And I think that's where I think AV kind of made that mistake. From what I understand, again, I'll give credit to Charlie O'Connor on this one because he's much closer to the team than I am, that it was brought up that they might replace his assistant coaches, but he wasn't very interested in doing that. And what I think is possible, and this actually was brought up by Charlie O'Connor as well, but I had this thought as well. Vasili, we might have talked about this, and then I'll pass it to you, that I wouldn't be shocked if like Rick Tocchet is brought in here. Maybe Mike Yeo stays the head coach for a little bit, and then Rick Tocchet actually runs the power play. Because this is something Vasili brought up. I believe you brought this up last time.
Yeah.
Tocchet ran the power play in Pittsburgh, and I think that was discussed in the offseason, actually. Yeah. But then again, do you really want to bring in a guy who might replace you?
I don't think that's going to happen. I'll tell you why. Because if I'm Rick Tocchet and I got a gig with ESPN or TNT, whichever one he's on, I think it's TNT actually. But why would he leave that gig if he's already established himself as someone who was somewhat coveted as an NHL coach? Yep. Why would he take a downgrade and then have Mike Yeo looking over his shoulder? The whole situation is kind of awkward. So I don't know if I buy that.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think it's an excellent point, and probably why it's kind of Mike Yeo or a new coach. Yeah. To your point, and whoever that coach is will probably want to bring in his own assistants as well. Vasili, go ahead, please respond.
Yeah, so in terms of Therrien and the whole AV connection and, AV potentially getting fired because he didn't want to let go of Therrien, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, we obviously know they have a close working relationship together. And as Saravalli, was pointing out in his DFO podcast, I mean, he was somebody that he relied on heavily in terms of delegation and communication with the players. So I think overall, just the culmination of frustration between the coaches, at least from AV's and Therrien's perspective, with the players, ended up playing a factor. I just feel as though the GM and even the ownership kind of knew, okay, these coaches aren't getting through to these players. There's no point of, letting one guy go. It just seems like at this point, the players dislike them both, evenly, essentially. So what's the point of, sacrificing one to keep one around? It's just going to end up being more of the same. And that just speaks to, maybe Mike Yeo's place on the staff in general. The fact that he's staying around is like, who knows, how much of his ideas, things like that were really heard on the coaching staff. I'm sure he had his say in terms of the penalty kill, but like other things like that, we know, like, Michel Therrien's a very stubborn type of coach. It's his way or kind of no way. And I'll go back to just what Isaiah was saying. He's one of those old time coaches that you kind of get, to coach a bad team because they're not going anywhere. When he was coaching the Canadians, I think 2013, 14, something like that, they were in the playoffs and they had Daniel Briere on that team. and he scratched Danny Briere in a game, and he said to him, and this was, I believe, quoted in a TSN article, that I'm scratching you tonight because nobody on the team respects you. So to say that to a player just kind of shows how he
which is one of like the most respected people in the NHL, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So that just kind of shows, right? So
go ahead.
It's really funny. Danny Briere, nobody respects Danny Briere. Danny Briere on and off the ice. Now, Danny Briere is a sneaky little bastard on the ice, with his stick. And he would get back. And he always found a way to get to the net. Unlike what I showed earlier on this iPad, Danny Briere, a lot like we saw with, Corey Perry last, like the way Corey Perry just kind of goes to the side of the net and gets himself in the scoring position. I mean, that... And then off the ice, everybody respected Danny Briere. I mean,
it's a reason he's coveted.
It's just a dick.
Yeah, and that video, if people do watch that video of him yelling at PK Subban, that's not PK Subban now at towards the end of his career. That's PK Subban when he's an all-star. So that's his best defenseman that he's talking to that way in that context as well. So. Just to add to that. Sorry, Vasili, did I cut you off? Did you want to add anything else?
No, it pretty much got the point across. I mean, it just was time for both of them, to go, really. And you could tell the players had enough of them in terms of communicating with them. Maybe if Vigneault took more of a hands-on approach and wasn't delegating as much to Therrien, maybe things could have been different. But you could just really tell that the players weren't willing to play for them anymore. And the longer they stayed on, the more the losses were going to pile up. And even, you see a loss yesterday with Mike Yeo behind the bench, but at least the team had life. They had some compete, because in that Tampa outing, which was AV and Therrien's last outing there, they just flat out died and rolled over and
quit. Yes.
Yeah, they quit. Exactly.
I will say this, and I've been watching the game a long time. Vasili, you've been watching. I know you're younger than us, and Isaiah, you've been watching longer than me. I don't know if you agree with this, but the system that I saw deployed, even when they were playing well, I still think some of the worst systems I have seen since, and you mentioned Dave Haxtell, and not Haxtell like a prime in the beginning. I actually thought Haxtell was okay. He was never a great coach. He was a decent coach. He's not an idiot, but he coached like he was scared to lose. And especially at the end, the second half, he was very scared to lose. And that's the sense that I got from AV when we were playing now. It's like we were playing like, hold on to your boots, guys. Like, maybe we'll make it out of this one alive. Like, that's how I felt when they were when I was watching every game.
Well, not to cut you off or anything.
Go ahead.
And you saw him even say, in the press conferences, we need to start trying to win games 2-1, 1-0 because we can't score. If you have the mentality that you're just going to sit in the shell the whole game and let up one goal in the regular season in the NHL, and then or let up 0 goals, or just one to win 2-1 and somehow win games. That's just not realistic. That just shows the mentality that the coaches had, and just the fact that AV exhausted all ideas, at least for him, in terms of how to right the ship and how to change things. Because if you're looking to win games 2-1 or 1-0 in the NHL right now, and it isn't like playoff time, how realistic is that in the first place? Mm-hmm. And then second of all, you're lacking scoring, and then you're benching, players that could help you score. Obviously Oscar Lindblom wasn't playing to his capabilities, but look what happened. You put him on the first line with Sean Couturier last night. He scores a goal.
He's been playing with, we brought this up. He's been playing with Nate Thompson 90% of the year.
You can't expect him to put goals. You can't expect him to get out of a slump in that situation. And then you have him not benching Morgan Frost, but cutting his ice time when he's been one of the best players in that Rangers game, last week. And you're wondering, okay, this kid, he's dynamic offensively. The team's struggling offensively. Wouldn't you give him more of a chance to try to show that he can actually contribute, especially when the team, is not really scoring goals?
They're not giving it to you.
Capacity. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything there, Isaiah?
No, I was just thinking that, he's complaining that he's got to win games 2-1 or 3-1 or 3-2, whatever. And we can't score. He's more or less waving, okay, we can't score. So I didn't really see him. What he did, it didn't look like systematically he really changed much. No. And he may have, I didn't see that. But it's almost like him planted into the brains of the players that we can't score.
I think the team's confidence decreased because of AV and Therrien.
Yeah.
I think they were criticizing them behind closed doors, not publicly, which again, I give them credit for that. And I think that happens more often than people think. But I think they were criticizing them considerably behind closed doors, and at the same time not doing anything themselves to really improve the situation. And I think that's how we kind of got to this point. That's how you decrease. Like, I don't think the Flyers are a Stanley Cup team. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're Tampa Bay. I don't think they're Carolina Hurricanes. But they're not lose 7-1 bad. They're not 9 in a row bad. That is a combination of getting out coached and your team's confidence just completely going out the window. And this is the second season in a row that we've seen this. This is not the first season. This happened last year as well. Go ahead, Vasili. You look like you want to say something.
If you're a player being criticized, let's say behind closed doors, as we're speculating that likely happened, which I mean, it most likely did, because during a 9-game losing streak, obviously there's going to be disputes between the coaching staff and the players. So you're a player, hypothetically, these coaches are criticizing your ability to score, yet you're not seeing them implement anything new in terms of schemes to potentially get the team to produce better offensively. So as a player, you're thinking in your head, well, these guys are criticizing us, but what exactly are they doing in terms of their jobs to try to help us get out of this?
Well, and can I add something to that point? Because I like the point you made there. Does anybody think that AV and Michel Therrien know the game of hockey better than Sean Couturier and Claude Giroux? Because I don't think so. I would say maybe equal, but I doubt they know more. Yeah. So at a certain point, when you're looking at like professional veterans who understand the game at a really high level, if they're seeing a system that they don't believe in, and they're seeing it replicated over, I think that's, eventually you're like, yo, this is not what we should be doing.
And, I mean, the way a good coaching staff succeeds, at least in my mind, is if you have veteran players, you need to rely on them, like we touched on last week, to be the bridge between you and the rest of the locker room.
Right.
So let's say there's new ideas. Yeah. Let's say there's new ideas that need to be implemented and you don't think the team's going to be able to grasp them. Why wouldn't you go to a veteran leader like Giroux or Couturier to say, hey, we want to try this instead because we don't believe this is working, versus not trying anything at all?
You know who I think was doing that? I think Chuck Fletcher was doing that and not AV. And if you remember last season, he's like, oh, me and Giroux had like long meetings about what's wrong with the team. Right. It's like, shouldn't you be doing that? Shouldn't AV and Giroux be doing that?
Yeah.
And,
they probably were. I
would hope so. Right.
All kind of, were collaborative in trying to get together. I don't think it was necessarily one kind of circumventing the other. I think what really happened here is this is an imperfect team. We know that. They're not as bad as they've shown so far, but they have some fundamental flaws. And those fundamental flaws are made that much more obvious with the injuries.
Yes.
And I still think we have a problem with the mental makeup of the team. And this has been a problem for a very, very long time.
So let's dig into that for a second, because I do want to talk about it. So I would agree, right? I don't think that Claude Giroux is the reason for that, but I think this team lacks some mental fortitude, and I think that's kind of without a doubt. But we went out, and mind you, Ryan Ellis not in a lineup, so I do think that changes something. Like Matt Niskanen, obviously, was very, very mentally strong. Maybe one of his best assets as an athlete, zero maintenance type of guy. And there's a lot of young guys, and for me, defensemen in their mid-20s, they're still young to me. Chris Pronger was traded at Provorov's age. Like Hedman struggled at 24. Like a lot of these guys, they really didn't become who they are till like their mid to late 20s, and then their 30s. That's when you become a great defenseman. But there is an issue with that. Having said that, we brought in guys who have a history of being strong mentally. We have guys who are character guys. Like nobody doubts like Braun is a character guy, right? Nobody doubts the veterans. I mean, Sean Couturier is not a weak guy mentally. So what do you think it is? And then Vasili, you can respond to this. What do you think it is that they're really missing? Like a guy like McEwen is not obviously not. Is it like that just the right combination of players? Because Chris Pronger, I would say, is an elite guy leader wise. There are like no Chris Prongers in the league. There's like, anyway. You're talking about like maybe one or two guys in the league that even have that. So you don't need that to be a good team, right? Or to be somewhat resilient. But what is it really that they're missing, do you think? Is it like, even a guy like Wayne Simmons, I think would be valuable for any team. But is that kind of what you're talking about, Isaiah?
Well, I mean, look what Bundy said on the podcast he's on.
Been very vocal.
Look what Scott Hartnell said on NHL Network.
Yes.
The Flyers, if it weren't for Carter Hart, this season would be in a toilet. The power play stinks. They're soft. They're not playing for this coach, whatever. They're really not a good team. It's a mess. And they see something, right? So what I'm extracting from that is when you're talking about Couturier and you're talking about Giroux, they see what I see. They see a team that doesn't fit together. The parts that they're not strong at center. Okay. Even when Kevin Hayes is out there, they don't really have dynamic elements. So the lineup doesn't have a lot of synergy. So you don't always have to have a bunch of shooters or a bunch of passers. You have to have the right combination of players. So there doesn't seem to be a spark in the lineup after Giroux. If Giroux is not going, who is going to pull the weight here? Who is that dynamic element? And this is why you get a guy like Frost in there and things just start, really moving along. That one shift he had, and I'll give Farabee credit too. Atkinson a few games ago, I don't know which game it was. There was one that they lost, obviously. But he sees Atkinson winning a battle. Farabee gets on his horse, makes a great play, sees that a forward is back, makes a dynamic play, and scores a goal. And then we saw at Madison Square Garden that great play by Frost, which was one of the only highlights all night. And it's like, where is more of that? And you contrast that with Tampa, and then last night, crazy over the top skill with Colorado. They have moments like that, like every other shift. And I think in today's game, with how fast it is, the Flyers really lack that element. So they're not only not getting to the net, they're not creating enough plays that get the other team back on their heels, so they can't dictate play to the other team. So what they have to do is they have to break out the lunch pail every game, and they're just not a grinded out team. So it's just a lack of synergy and a lack of cohesion.
They're not a grinded out team, and when they're forced to play that way, they do not excel.
I think that's it.
Yeah, and then I mean, just to jump off your point, I really do believe that just the combination of players, and then with the coaches that you had, Tarian and AV there, it just wasn't working. But also, just they have a bit of a fragility, so you'd see them, let a goal, and then you could kind of almost see it in their faces. Oh no, here we go again. It's going to happen to us again, and then things just spiral on them, and that's what's been happening over this 9-game losing streak. So not to say they need to be coddled, but obviously the criticizing the coaches were doing probably gets to them in a certain sense, which is not, something you would want in terms of players you'd want to build around, obviously. But you're right. I mean, just in terms of the teams that are contenders in this league, look at their offense, look at how they play. They have dynamic forwards. Do the Flyers have dynamic forwards? I mean, Claude Giroux's dynamic. Is he what he used to be? Not really, but he's still a very good player. Joel Farabee, he's on his way to becoming dynamic, but he's still very young. He may get there, but he's not there yet. And Morgan Frost is probably their second closest behind Giroux and Farabee, to being that type of player. And you can see flashes with Frost is the thing. I mean, you see him on the power play, the way he moves the puck, the way he passes the puck, his vision on the ice. You can tell that there's something there in terms of skill, and we're just scratching the surface. And I know Mike Yeo even reiterated that in his press conference last night after the loss, that one of the reporters asked a question, what did you think of Frost's game? And he said, well, he played very well and he's getting more comfortable out there, but he doesn't even know what his potential is yet. So that just shows to me that, Yeo believes in Frost. He's going to give him all the chances and opportunities to succeed. I personally think the more you play a guy like Frost with Giroux, the easier it's going to be to get that type of dynamic play out of him, because you can see them really feed off of each other. And it shows that, Frost has that ability like Giroux to think the game very highly. So we'll see what happens. But just in terms of the pieces right now, it doesn't look as though the mix is something where, it's a Stanley Cup team or even close. Are they a playoff team in terms of maybe making it into the last wild card, something along those lines? I'm not sure. They have talent on the team, but obviously they have to right the ship quickly for something like that to happen. So.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about the fact that JVR has been completely ineffective for.
Yeah.
I don't even know how long already.
I don't even notice him
months
on the ice. Really.
Yeah,
he's a non-entity right now.
Yeah, and we can keep digging in this. I do want to mention one comment, just going off of Vasili, what you said. Something I noticed last night in the game is, when the Flyers fell behind, Mike Yeo called a timeout. And I was like, when's the last time you saw that?
Yeah, right.
And I was like, I don't think AV has done that. I don't know if at all this year.
Ever. Not this year.
Where he kind of like rallied, the team, they repoised. And in fairness, I mean, they actually did bring a better effort after that. I do think this team right now is mentally fragile. I don't think they're more mentally fragile than other players in general. I do agree, though, and I think you bring up a good point there, Isaiah, about the right mix, because when Laviolette was fired, nobody thought Peter Laviolette was a bad coach, right? Like, you didn't go like, Laviolette, he sucks, right? And we know he got along with Giroux. That one, we're like certain of that. I mean, he called Giroux the best player in the world. And he was actually a guy, like, his system just didn't work. We were actually probably more built for AV system the way we were back then, which is probably why Berube got a little more out of them. But I do think that there's a lot to what you're saying, where I think we have good centermen, right? And I think, given Hayes has not been, healthy, so we're not really seeing the same Kevin Hayes, but he's not a dynamic playmaker. Like, he is a playmaker to some degree. He's a big body, but he's not like Nick Suzuki. He's not even a Morgan Frost. And I do want to shift into this because I want to go back to Mike Yeo, who I think might have a better read on this team than the other two coaches. I don't think Claude Giroux should be playing center permanently, but I mean, he's pointing out exactly what you just said, Isaiah. He goes, we have one dynamic center and we're playing him on the left wing. And he shifted him in the middle last night. I'm not saying that is the solution. He moves Frost over to the wing. And, I think, to your point, I mean, I think we do. I think Couturier, especially last year and the year before, I think he is a number one center. But maybe this team is just missing a top six forward in general. That is maybe what we lost when we moved Jake Voracek out, but can play center, like a guy who can distribute the puck. Brassard has some of that back in the day. He isn't that really anymore, right? We don't have that type of guy, to your point, anymore outside of Giroux. And maybe that is like a guy like, I don't think he's available, but Ricard Raquel, right? That's a guy who's not a number one center, but he is a dynamic playmaking second line player. Like, can this team add somebody like that? But I do think, you bring up a good point. Like, we have a lot of certain type of players and we don't have a lot of like dynamic players anymore. I would even argue we have some shooters now.
Well, let me ask you something now.
Please, no, go ahead.
Let's look at the power play. And in all the years I can remember, I can't think of when the Flyers have had two top centers on their team who were really almost useless on the power play. And really,
how about Couturier and Hayes?
Yeah. I mean, what did they do? You're not worried about their shot. They're not particularly great passers. They're nice passers, but
Couturier should be in the bumper spot, and we said that last episode too. Yeah, but go ahead, please.
I think he's actually better off right in front of the net because his best ability
in the slot
is to clean up garbage and tip passes. Tip shots and all that. But really, that's a problem. That's a big problem in today's game. People say, the analytics people get out the numbers and the calculators and the actuarial charts and say, Barkov is nowhere near as good as Couturier. Well, I'll tell you, if you got a power play late in the third period, who do you want out there at center? You're going to want Barkov 10 times out of 10. And I think that player needs to be on the Flyers long term. So if I'm Chuck Fletcher and we're making a comment about how this team is put together, they need a young center who can bring that dynamic element and be a major factor on their power play going forward. Or else I can't think of a team that's ever done anything that didn't at least have one of those guys at the pivot.
And I think Mike Yeo agrees with you, man, because, again, I pointed out the Giroux thing, and then you look at the way the power play was run that night. Frost was on the top unit, and he was definitely... He was definitely moving the puck. He was the one in control of playmaking, him and Claude Giroux. You didn't see a lot of Couturier making plays on the power play. And I've actually been thinking, like, why isn't Couturier like in that slot trying to take those one-timers away? Braden Shen was doing it, the way Scott Hartnell did it. Like, why is he the one creating plays? Like, it's not that he's a bad playmaker, but it's not his game.
He doesn't have the vision of those other players that we're speaking of. Essentially.
Well, it's also what I go back. Like, did did AV and Michelle Therrien really have a great read on their players? And I've thought this over and over again where I'm like, they use them in ways where I'm like, I don't get what you're doing. Like, I don't like stuff, and again, I actually think Max Willman maybe had his best game of the season last night. And I like Max Willman. So I feel like I'm picking on him, but I don't mean to. I'm just using it as an example because I do think he has NHL longevity at some point in his career. But when I saw them move him up to the third line, and again, I don't think Zach McEwen is like a third line scorer or anything. But when I saw them do that, right, and then they're like shifting JVR to the top line, even though he's struggling, and it's like, I'm like, are you watching the same game that I'm watching? You know, like this decision you're making is obviously a complete temporary solution. He didn't even stay with it past the period. And I knew they wouldn't. And I kept like thinking like, do they know what they actually have? And, you know, maybe
the answer is no, to be honest with you.
Is it no, or are they protesting themselves where they're like, well, I don't have what I need?
Even last week, you saw like they bring up Morgan Frost and where should he be on the power play where he was yesterday, kind of below the net or on the half boards, kind of peeling out and trying to make plays with his vision and his great passing ability. And they had him as a front of the net presence on the power play, which just speaks to like, is Morgan Frost the front of the net guy in the NHL? No, right? No. So it just shows. And I think Yo has more of a faith, I guess, in Frost. And we're saying, like, do the Flyers have a dynamic center other than Claude Giroux? And I mean, realistically, Kevin Hayes and Couture aren't dynamic offensively. I mean, they're great defensively. You can still win with guys like that in your lineup, obviously, but just in different ways. Frost on Giroux's left wing is interesting to me because it's almost like a, hey, kid, look at what Giroux's done his whole career. We want you to do that. Learn from him. Yeah. So it's kind of almost like you're on his left wing. Like I could personally see in the near future games where, you know, Giroux stays at center for a little bit, and then you'll see them swap where Frost goes to center and then Giroux goes to left wing eventually. Sure. I think that's what they're trying to go with it. I mean, long term, that's just my prediction. I'm not sure if it'll happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's why they have the two together. And then ultimately with the power play, I mean, Isaiah is 100% right. Like, do they have a dynamic center that can really control things on the power play? I mean, Giroux is still a good player. Obviously, he's, you know, getting up there in age. They're going to need to find somebody to replace him. They're probably hoping that's Frost. Personally, the best setup for them to have success on that power play when he gets back is you'd have Giroux and Frost delegating passes to each other and around the ice in terms of the offensive zone setup, and then trying to set up Farabee for one-timers, because he's probably their best shooter, him or Atkinson. That's probably your best chance of success on the power play with the players that they have right now. And it kind of speaks to the mix and the fact that they do need to add players who are more dynamic in that part of the ice, because the power play is so important these days in the NHL. And it's really a facet of you being able to win games that you shouldn't win. And so far the Flyers, I mean, have been losing a lot of games, and the power play can be pointed to as one of the reasons as to why. So.
Absolutely. Isaiah, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, a power play a lot of times can win you a game. Maybe you didn't play your best, but the power play got you through, and it kept your confidence up. And then when your power play sinks a little bit, your 5-on-5 can come up. You know, it's like whack-a-mole for a good reason as opposed to what it is now, you know? So that, to me, going forward, this is kind of starts bleeding into Chuck Fletcher's area. It's like, this team is not put together long-term to win a cup. And he's got a decision to make. He's going to try and salvage this team from the Comcast perspective to get into the playoffs, put butts in seats, earn some revenue. But really, where are we going with this? And it has me thinking about, you know, their contracts, the makeup of the team, like we've been discussing. And wow, you know, it's a lot to take on if you're Chuck Fletcher, because, you know, it's like it's like, the way I look at it is this. He tried to at first salvage what Ron Hextall did. He didn't want to just throw all of that work out because he liked some of it. He had enough time to observe it. But after the disaster of last year, he had to remake some things. But where are we at now with Claude Giroux going to be 34 in January, free agent, a lot of big contracts for players that aren't really doing that great, and you might have to sell like for pennies on a dollar, like JVR, just to get rid of a contract.
You have to buy him out at this point, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, So if you're going forward with that, even if they made the playoffs this year, I think they would look like a one and done team. I don't know how they get out of this. They have to have Ryan Ellis back, and then you got 5 more years. Hopefully he can be healthier. He's going to miss 10 to 15 games every year in a good year. Right now, this is like, the worst it's been since, last year he missed a concussion, and then he had, or was that 2 years ago? I forget. And then he had crushed
last year. I think he had the wrist.
Right, the wrist or the knuckle or something
like that. His hand.
So there's a lot going on here. And another thing they want to look at is, what is Ivan Provorov? Ivan Provorov is one kind of player with a steady Eddie like Niskanen and Ryan Ellis on his flank. What is he without him?
Well,
a totally different player.
In fairness, how many defensemen in this league are really talented by themselves? Like we're not, like, you really can't name them. Like most defensemen, I mean, you could talk about Hedman. Okay,
you mean like a standalone defenseman?
Yeah, that there are like 2 of them in the league, and
no.
I would even. I mean,
Charlie McAvoy is a young guy right around pro.
He's not by himself. He's not by himself.
Yeah, he's picking up another guy. He's picking up another young guy. He got experience with Chara, or I think when he was here, I forget. I think that's who he was playing with. And now Chara's gone.
Right. Yes.
Right. So, and he's picking up the younger guy that he's playing with. I mean, clearly a better player. It's just the way it goes. And I think there's quite a few players that are very good that are standalone. But what you're kind of saying, what I'm saying is he could play on the first pair, but he is down like a full notch without that other guy. He's Matt Carle to Chris Pronger. So he's a lot closer on the sliding scale to Matt Carle than he is to Chris Pronger, if you will.
I would agree. Look, Chris Pronger is a legendary
I'm just saying,
defenseman.
We have to know who these guys are as if we move forward.
Well, I agree with that, but you got to look at, like, I'm not saying that he is Chris Pronger, right? But even if you look at a guy like Kimmo Timonen, he was an average defenseman at 24 years old. Like, the reality is that a lot of guys who are not the best defenseman in the league, they're just
but he was a 9th round draft pick. He was a 9th round draft pick. Ivan Provorov is like the 8th overall. It makes a difference.
Nick Lidstrom was a 9th round draft pick. He's the best defenseman of all time.
Yeah, but nobody expected. Kimmo Timonen was an undersized guy. I mean, that's a great story, right? But it took many years, and we got Kimmo when he was 32. Okay, and it took a long time. Right now, Ivan Provorov, I love Kimmo. I loved him and Rico and all those guys. But Ivan has some fundamental issues he still has to work out with his handle, his decision-making. And then when he gets down on himself, I mean, so we got to decide how we're going to allocate dollars and how we want to build this team going forward. Because even past just this year, I think they need a major makeover. And I don't want to push the topic into that direction necessarily, but I think it's all interrelated. Right now is a decision time. Like, who you're going to bring in as coach is going to be, if you want to try and close out this year, you could probably get the most out of the team if you brought in Tortorella. But I don't want to see that here.
I don't want to see Tortorella here.
Please no.
I think Tortorella is going to have a short lifespan here.
Most likely.
Yeah.
It's almost like AV would be somewhere smiling. I mean,
I don't think Tortorella would be that different from Alain Vigneault, to be honest.
No.
With you.
I have a question to pose here for you guys. Do you think Fletcher missed the boat potentially on Jack Eichel, if you're talking about dynamic centers that you could have brought into this?
I would have gone for Eichel. Yes. Personally, but we don't know if he was actually in on him or not. They might have not.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Wondering what the Flags had to offer.
I think the thing that he was having this novel procedure of a disc replacement as opposed to diffusion.
And he's still not back, to your point.
And he's still not back.
But he's skating, though. But I mean, like,
this is a year I think the Flyers wanted to take a step forward to try and prove that 20 wasn't a fluke.
Yeah.
And the fluke was last year.
Our team was worse than 20.
Yeah.
What's
on
that?
paper. Our team was worse than 20 on paper.
You're talking about like Corsi and stuff like that?
Just on paper. No, like, look at the names on paper. Like, we had to go out and get Grant and Nate Thompson. Like, we couldn't even ice a full lineup and we made the
Yeah,
playoffs.
but his special teams were golden. I mean, that's really helped the team, because their PK was good.
Yes, top 10.
And their power play was good enough. It wasn't spectacular, but it made
it's huge. I agree, it's huge. And I think we definitely are missing that this year. And I like what you said earlier, how it ends up not being able to support our 5-on-5 play, which was actually not bad to start the year. And then just got progressively worse as the power play was just completely ineffective. So what do you guys, let's talk about the game a little bit. So Flyers lose 7-5 to the Avs. The Avs score, 7 goals top shelf on Jones. I don't necessarily think Jones was the problem. They had 50 shots on net. But I was a little surprised that they didn't put Hart in at a certain point. Not that I think Jones was responsible for the loss. But you give up that many goals, you would think that maybe you'd go for the other goalie. I mean, they pulled Hart the night before, when the team was playing terrible. So it's just surprising that they didn't switch goalies. But again, Flyers fought back. Lawton scores the nice shorty at the end there to make it 7-5. It did feel at some point like my buddy was watching, he's a very big sports fan, my roommate, not a huge Flyers fan, but he watches everything. He's like, I think the Flyers are going to win this game. And again, this is not a guy who's like a homer, and he'll call it as it is, but he never got the sense that the Flyers were completely out of that one. And I will say that is the positive. I wouldn't say it was a positive game. I don't want to jump into that territory, but it did at least feel like something different than what we've been watching. Again, they scored 5 goals in the game. They gave up 7, which is a nightmare in my opinion. 2 games of 7 goals is ridiculous. But I did notice less tension especially after Yo called that the timeout. Lindblom got his first of the year, playing with Coots and connecting, something that I've been calling for a while, which I didn't understand. They didn't try once yet. And it just felt like Claude Giroux again took the team on his back. Obviously, it had a lot to do with that, I think, a little bit. But Atkinson almost had a couple goals himself. He had 1 goal and then almost scored again later. It was just a different vibe to the game. And I want to see if Yo or whoever it is can at least get this team on track, where if we do need to rebuild, which I think to some degree we have to retool, right? At least let's find out what the real actual problem is, as opposed to everything being broken, which is how it feels right now. Isiah, I'll open up to you first, and then Vasili, you respond. What do you think about that loss? Did it feel different to you? I would say it's at least more entertaining of a game.
Well, I think as fans coming off the 7-1 and the fact that they've lost 8 in a row. I mean, if you have a podcast, it always feels like homework, It's like, I have my assignment tonight. Watch. That's why I put everything on a DVR. It's great. I just jumped through the commercials.
Yeah.
It's great. But I think, look, when they made it 5-4, I wasn't like, quote, a believer. I was thinking, well, listen, it's competitive. They look a little looser. They're not quitting. It's like, it's like a stepping stone. And then again, on the other hand, I thought to myself, well, here's Colorado just dialing it up. It's a skill just blew them away. And I think the reason why they didn't replace Martin Jones is because of that competitiveness of the game. And I think Yo's like, my first time out, I don't want to make it look like I'm pulling the goalie like it's his fault. Like, clearly,
it wasn't.
I agree with AV pulling Hart at that point.
It was a mercy pull. It was a mercy pull for him.
It was. And this one was a little different. It was a competitive game. It was like 80s hockey, as I called it. And it was okay, but hopefully it's a building block and they could do something with it. But that's about all you could get out of that game. I mean, their flaws are their flaws. And Yo is, if he wants to install different systems, he's going to need a couple days in a row to start, tweaking things. Right now, you just have to play the games.
Yep.
Yeah. And I would say, just to piggyback off you there, Isiah, all we could really take from a game like that where you give up 7 goals, I mean, they're still atrocious defensively in their own zone, tons of breakdowns. It's more just an encouraging game and more of a stepping stone, as you were saying. I mean, essentially, the best thing to notice is the team didn't give up. They're down 4-1 in the first period, and they didn't give up. And that's something that they've been doing constantly over this losing streak. They get down on themselves as a team, and then they give up from that point, and then you see things unravel. So at least To their credit, they didn't give up on that game. They tried to fight back. They tried to win. I mean, Colorado is one of the best teams in the league. I don't think we should have been going into the game really expecting them to win. Obviously, we're all hopeful. We want to see them break the streak. I think it's more realistic that happens Wednesday night against the Devils versus obviously Colorado, just because they're both kind of in a tailspin right now, the Devils and the Flyers. I think that's a game they need to capitalize on and win for sure. The most encouraging thing for me out of that game, as well as the fact that they didn't give up and quit on the play, is the chemistry of Frost and Giroux. I think there's really something there, and something that can develop, and maybe.
And we've seen it in the past as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Did you have anything else to say? I didn't mean to stop you.
That's pretty much all in terms of that game. I mean, when you're giving up 7 goals, there's not really much that you can say is technically a positive. You shouldn't be giving up 7 goals and winning games. I mean, it's really never going to happen where that's the case.
I do remember one game where the Flyers scored 7 goals and the Jets scored 8.
Oh yeah,
I remember that game.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah,
Briere scores a couple goals that night.
Horrendous. I was so pissed at that game. And here we are years later, 2 goal games in a row. Fantastic.
Not good.
Not as bad as the year before, where it was what, 8,
but you're
9?
What you're hoping with is that, Mike Yo's defensive systems are a lot different than Vigneault's. Vigneault's a lot more aggressive in terms of the fact that with the way he had his system in the own zone is a lot of players are rotating, and if they don't rotate at the right time, that leaves people open. So I don't think that Yo is going to run things like that. I think it's going to be more similar to like a trap style, which could be good for this Flyers team, might be bad. We'll see. What they've been doing lately hasn't been working. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Yo, when he gets a few days to kind of implement things, if they get tighter defensively, but I wouldn't expect it to be an overnight thing. Like on Wednesday, when we see them play the Devils, I'm expecting them to not be the greatest in their defensive zone as well. And maybe, the new addition, Kevin Connaughton, will help the third pair. We will see.
Yeah. Well, before we get to Connaughton, what did you guys think about the line combinations? Again, you mentioned Giroux playing with Frost. Couturier was with Lindblom and TK, which we've seen in the past. We had Hayes with Lawton and Atkinson. We had obviously JVR. I think JVR was with Giroux and Couturier, if I remember. Or am I reading that?
Yeah.
Giroux and Frost, yeah. Which again, JVR has been really disappointing this year. Just incredibly disappointing. Not putting up any offensive opportunities really at all. Like I can't remember the last time I thought he was going to score a goal. And then the final, the last line itself, McEwen's back on the fourth line, which I think is where he's best. Brown, filling in for Thompson, which I don't really think there's much of a loss between Brown and Thompson. I think it's same caliber of player. Maybe Brown's a better skater actually. Willman, I think actually had a decent performance. But what did you guys think about the offensive lines? I think the D, he ended up going with the same. I think in warmups he had Risto with Provorov, but I think overall in the night they kept Risto.
He kept putting Sealer in there sometimes. Braun. It was kind of just a rotating cast.
Yeah, which again, all to fill in that Ryan. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say. Look, there's a problem. Keith Yandel is a guy who clearly belonged on the street. He's really leaking oil, and he's a guy who's on his last legs. I don't know if he's got some kind of injury, but he looks like he just doesn't have the gas. There's not a lot in the tank for him. So for him to play with a guy like Sealer is got to be such a drain on him. If he's playing with a guy like Braun, maybe he can fake it and get by, but they have to upgrade that position. So again, like how many times I've just never seen a team just like once their pairs get a little thrown off, it's like the whole thing just crumbles like a house of cards. It's unbelievable. And this is why they keep together Risto and Sandheim. It's kind of like, okay, stable. We have one. Yeah, they're not the best pair potentially, but it's some stability, but everything around them. And like the top four, I was looking at Appleyard and he was saying the top four aren't great, but you still have a chance. When you have Sealer and Yandel, it's done. They're getting buried.
Yep.
And it's where they're giving up like tons of goals, like 21 goals
It's
against, and they're facing the worst competition, less amount of minutes. It's just, you're right. They're just not.
they're hemorrhaging and high value opportunities, high quality chances. So this is why they go out and play the lottery on the waiver wire and get Kevin Connaughton. Because Kevin Connaughton in flashes has played above his actual level, but at least he is an NHL player, where Nick Seeler is, hey, look, you give him credit for effort, A for effort, but the talent just isn't there. Maybe because he's a little bit more pedigreed as an NHL defenseman, he might give them a little more. But they need Ryan Ellis to come back. There is nothing that'll help this team more right now than to get Ryan Ellis, get him in there for 10, 15 straight games and see if it calms down the situation. And eventually, as they get closer to the trade deadline, if they get better and they're back in playoff position, they have to go out and get a better veteran D-man, because you always have injuries in the playoffs. And regardless, Yandel, Seeler, and probably Connaughton are not an answer. 2 out of 3 of those guys can't be in the regular rotation.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot to the Ellis thing, though. I think if Ellis is in this lineup and Braun is in that bottom pairing, it does stabilize whoever is playing in that bottom pairing. I think there's a huge trickle-down effect. Having said that, this is the second year in a row where we haven't had a top pairing on the right side. And it's definitely an issue. Like, Provorov, for his struggles, he's not supposed to be playing with Nick Seeler or even Justin Braun in a top pairing role. Like, it's not a combination for success, And I think that's been hurting a guy who's pretty young. And I think that's why the Flyers went out and invested in Ryan Ellis. So, like, we have a great young goalie. We have a really good young defenseman. Let's make sure he, develops properly rather than let him getting hammered every night publicly. I think, it does have an effect long term. We saw what happened to Ristolainen in Buffalo, right? And why he's over here with us. It's an interesting question. I mean, if we don't do well this year, like, are the Flyers re-signing Ristolainen, or are they trading him at the trade deadline? That could definitely happen too, right? Like, how do you re-sign the guy if you do need to retool? I mean, he's going to make a good amount of money. You're going to need some cap space, right? So, or do they trade Sanheim? I don't know. I don't know what they end up doing. Like, Braun doesn't make that much. Yandel doesn't make much. Seeler doesn't make much, right? Going to have to move out Cap. Maybe you move out JVR. I don't really know. But
it's tough. You have to factor in the age too. Braun's 34. Giroux's 34. JVR is what, 33, 34. So
yeah. He's the same age as Giroux.
He's 07 draft. So
yeah.
So he's 33. So that's going to factor in your decision as well.
There's a lot of question marks, and I was saying earlier, and even mentioned on Twitter last night after watching the game, and that Yandel gaff where he gets beaten to the puck and then they just score right away, and they that kind of is the backbreaker in that game, because they get back in and then they give up the goal right away there. It's just like Yandel, like, I've been watching the Flyers for a long time. Obviously, you guys have been watching longer than me, you're older than me, but realistically, I could say that Yandel and Seeler, might be one of the worst third pairings that they've had in the last decade, and that speaks to how bad they've been. Just because how bad has their defense been in terms of the players they've iced in the last decade? Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, Bruno Gervais.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's been some bad ones, but maybe level, yeah, but maybe I will say at least Yandel has a history of being an all-star. Nick Seeler is a guy you're really not supposed to be a regular guy in your lineup at the NHL level. A good character guy. I like his personality a lot, but if you play him with Yandel, I mean, we even saw the coaches reverting to putting Seeler up there because they're like, we can't have Yandel and Seeler together out there at the same time.
Like, you can realize and you can see that Seeler is out of place, and Yandel probably at this point may be out of place too. But obviously they have a respect for him and his Ironman streak. They're going to play him and let him get to that record. That's what it looks like to me.
He also has the ability to actually do something offensively while he's not very good defensively anymore. Like, Sealer's really not going to give you anything in the offensive zone. Exactly. And the team is struggling offensively.
Obviously, you have young guys in the AHL that are struggling too. Cam York has COVID. You can't call him up. You have, like, is Igor Zamula, hypothetically, is he going to be worse for you than Nick Seeler?
I think it's more to protect Zamula.
Yeah,
it's more to protect. It is. No, definitely.
Because the difference is going to be negligible.
Yeah, most likely. but it's just like, that's why they pick up Connaughton. Obviously, they want some sort of change there, but it just shows like the defense is in shambles. And then back to your question just about the lines in general. I mean, I like the offensive lineup and what it looked like. Personally, I mean, they miss Farabee and his shooting ability. Obviously, Cam Atkinson still has a great shot.
Broussard, I would argue
Miss
too.
Broussard, yeah, Miss Broussard as well. So, I mean, until they get healthy with Broussard, Ellis, and Farabee back, I mean, it's going to be hard for them to get back on track, but at least they look better in terms of creating some scoring opportunities, and hopefully that's something to build on for the future. But you're right there, Isaiah, hit the nail on the head that, I mean, Ellis is the most important player in terms of everything right now for this team and just the defensive makeup and the structure. Because without him, they just are all slotted out of place, and in terms of their in zone coverage, are lost in a lot of different areas.
Man, the season started off on such a high note.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking back when you saw Provorov and Isaiah, I'll let you comment in a second.
Yeah,
when you saw Provorov and Ellis together, at least when I did, I'm like, man, finally a top pairing. I was like, we haven't had a top pairing in a long time. And I was like, we finally have two very competent defensemen playing together who can play a two-way game. I was like, it's the best pairing we've had since Niskanen was here. And I'd argue Ellis is better than Niskanen. And it's like, wow, it was like super exciting. And then, where we are today, it's crazy. Go ahead, Isaiah. Sorry.
Now, I was going to say, I think it still speaks to the organizational spine, because when you look at what Pittsburgh has been through, we're missing Crosby, missing Malkin, and all these guys, and they had COVID and injuries and all this kind of thing. And they've been able to hold it together. And this has happened many times for Pittsburgh.
Of course.
And I think the Flyers have never really achieved that. And I think part of that is a mental thing where the Pittsburgh knows they've won cups. And I'm not even going back to 08 and 09 where they went to the finals. So just recently when they went back-to-back cups. And you have all these kids that went through a system and that did well, and they took their time with them, and they all go through it. And you see this with Tampa too. Tampa gives all these kids at least 100 games,
Yeah, totally agree.
And I
Radish,
just think
you can name
exactly.
The
That's how they get this guy Kachuk and Radish and these guys. And I think they played with Frost in the juniors.
Yeah.
And they lit it up.
Jose Marie.
Okay, so what happens here? And the Flyers need to get this going, because this is one thing where Hextall actually got it right. You've got to bake these guys and let them stay down, because that way, if you have injuries, you don't fall apart, and you don't, some kid's coming up. He's only played a couple, 30 AHL games, or he's an ECHL guy and he's Max Willman. And I just think that you need to have guys that are committed to be in the AHL for a period of time, so we don't fall apart. You don't have these inequities in the lineup, and they need to do this on defense. So that's why I think Zamula and York have to stay and really blow it out of the water in the AHL before we bring them up. And I think Pittsburgh, getting back to that, they've been able to get by these rough periods of times and not crumble, because if Letang has a stroke and he's out of the lineup, that's a number one defenseman. They didn't fall apart, and they don't have such great personnel. A lot of people criticize Brian Dumoulin is probably their next best guy, right?
Yeah. So, he's just a top four dude. He's not anything. Yeah.
So what is the difference between what Pittsburgh has been able to do,
Mike Sullivan,
in terms of being able to be more resilient than the Flyers? And now this has been going on now for about 6-7 years.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that the Flyers culture is as strong, and it's without a denial. I mean, look how many, and again, I don't even think that the coaching firings are the worst thing, because the reality is that coaches get fired in the NHL, GMs get fired here. It's a big part of the league. It is what it is. And I think if you look at the Capitals, how many firings have they had? How many different coaches they had? I think it's part of it, but I do agree with what you're saying, man. I think it's obvious that when this team goes through some adversity, I would say at least 50% of the time, they're overwhelmed by it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they can last through it, but it's been a long time since they've been able to take the brunt of injuries and just keep trucking along. And really the last time I saw anything like that, maybe the Eric Lindros era, the Keith Primo era. where you had, the Flyers could go out and kind of buy a team. But they really haven't been able to have a team that can sustain serious injuries and continue trucking and playing a system. And that's where I come to the coach thing. And I'm like, you got to find a coach that works for your team. Like, you have to get a coach that can get the most out of every player in your lineup, at least the majority of them, under the worst of times. And that's why I was like, all right, I'm done with AV, because I don't care if you don't have the number one center. I don't care if you don't have the perfect defenseman. In fact, I didn't want Ellis coming in here and then things getting better because Ellis is playing, but only getting better because you have more talent. I want you to get the most out of what you do have. And I think it's hard to find these coaches that are the right fit at the right time, but you got to go out and find them. And you can't rest too much with the coach you do have. And let's touch on this, actually, because we brought this up prior to the show, and Vasili sent this out to me prior to this, but Ryan Whitney's tweet saying that, it's kind of a troll tweet, I would say. I don't really think that it's, at least I'm not saying he is trolling. I don't really know, but Isaiah, we talked about this. It seems extremely unlikely. If Ryan Whitney, if they lose this game, apparently referring to the Islanders, Trotz is gone and probably behind the Flyers by Friday. I think, and Isaiah, I know you agree with me on this, and Vasili, you probably agree with me on this too. But the odds of Lou Lamoriello reacting quickly and firing a coach that got the most out of his team and now is struggling right now, I would say highly unlikely. But if he does, and Barry Trotz is our coach, I mean, that's the type of stuff I'm looking for, at least. But I don't really think that's going to be the case. Vasili, I'll let you comment first, and then Isaiah.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of Trotz and then Whitney's, comment on Trotz there is pretty much, I mean, like, most likely he's not going to get fired. Think about the Islanders and what they've gone through. I mean, they had 12, or I don't know if it was 12 on the road they started with, or 17 games on the road, but they had a huge, they had a huge, road, game streak on the go there, and then from that point lost a ton of games, and then get COVID, lose more games, and then a bunch of injuries as well to add on to that. So I don't know if Lamoriello is one to let a coach with that much success go at that point. And then, I mean, you also have the fact that, I mean, does he really leak anything anyway? So is that just information that's actually legitimate, or something that he's doing to kind of troll down their fans? So obviously, as Flyers fans and people that are watching the team and around the team, we want to see a coach like Trotz potentially brought in to be a solution, because you see how great of a system he can run and how much he can get out of teams that really don't have the most amount of talent. Just look at the past few Islanders teams and how deep they've gone in the playoffs. I mean, were they as talented as those Tampa Bay teams, or even really close to it? Not necessarily, but obviously the system he runs can bring the best out of certain players. If he sometimes does get fired and the Flyers can bring him in, if there's any coach that could turn around the season and salvage things, that would be, I mean, one of them, obviously. But I mean, I would put it at like a 25% chance at this point. And that's probably even lower than that, really.
Yeah. Go ahead, Isaiah.
Well, it's 1-1 in the second period, and the Islanders only had 9 shot attempts in the first period, and only one more so far in the second. So, I don't want to confuse shot attempts with shots on goal, but so shots on goal through about halfway through the second period, Islanders 10, Senators 19. So the Islanders are not playing in inspired hockey. Should we call this the count down the Trotz?
Can you imagine the Flyers actually ended up with Barry Trotz as a coach by the end of this?
I can't see, like you were saying, because we were talking about before the show, Lou Lamoriello would not kick a guy like Barry Trotz to the curb like that.
Not that quickly. I know it's been really
circumstances too that they've had to deal with this season with COVID.
Yeah, I mean,
and he's a Stanley Cup winner.
They are bad. They're 5-10-5 through 20 games. They're minus 23, and they're what is their
Didn't they lose Pulak for like?
And they've lost 11 in a row.
Yeah.
Hey,
so if there's it's not a 9. It's not a 9 game. Yeah, it's not a 9 game losing streak.
Yeah. So I mean, what are we complaining about? Come on.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, it's absolutely true. Some of this was not predicted. Look, it's not impossible that he get fired. I don't want to say it's impossible. It's never impossible.
It's a results-oriented business, and you're losing 11 games in a row.
Yeah.
Something's got to give eventually.
Yeah, I do think, though, to what Isaiah was saying, it's like Lou Lamoriello firing somebody reactively that he brought in that showed success. I just think
slim chance.
Well, I mean, we didn't even fire AV after last season, right? We gave him another chance.
Yeah.
We gave him this season, and it took a second collapse for us to be like, okay, you pull the plug.
The leash is probably longer for him.
Well, and again, Laviolette took us to the finals. He had a bad season. They were trending in the wrong direction. We still let him have the preseason. Fired him after 3 games, which was like they were thinking about firing him prior to that, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think
Dead man walking.
Yeah,
just like AV.
Yeah, no, I think Fletcher was thinking about firing AV earlier. It's just
no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think it is their responsibility to give it a chance and not, it's easy to be a fan and be like, yeah, I'm done with this. Trade this guy, but it's like you really can't behave that way if you're running an organization.
You can't, because what's the other guy gonna think? The new guy coming in, who prospectively you're looking at. Well, he said, look, Elaine just was runner-up Jack Adams Award for 20, has one bad year, and all kinds of circumstances that anyone could point to when we don't necessarily agree, but that's from the outside, that's what it's going to look like. How are you going to attract anybody that you really want if that's your reputation? And besides, that's not the MO of Chuck Fletcher anyway. You got to be yourself on the job. You can't be somebody else.
He's not very overreactive in terms of making moves. Like, he's not going to make a reaction type of trade, type of firing. He seems like a very collected type of individual who really thinks through something if he's going to do it. And I would say and argue that he probably didn't even want to fire Vigneault when it happened, and he probably would have given him even more of an opportunity probably after this stretch if it didn't come from Dave Scott, right?
And I think it probably did. I mean, that's what I heard. I heard that it was actually Dave Scott. That's like if Fletcher was vacillating, whether he was or not, he had to be at least really thinking about it. Dave Scott said, "Listen, might as well pull the trigger now." Because I would have necessarily could see him waiting after that 5-game stretch where they had a couple of days off. That would have made sense. But that's 3 more games that they could get buried, or 4 more games in this case.
3 more losses. And then the hole's undiggable at that point.
Almost.
The fact that they coached the game with an assistant, that Ian LePerriere was on the bench. Yeah. They didn't even have a coaching staff ready. They haven't really interviewed anybody formally.
Right. That says a lot.
Yeah, it says a lot. Like, typically, and again, we've been through some firings. It's not the first time I've seen it.
What is it, like 7 coaches in the last 7 years or something like that? Or 7 seasons?
I think
I went through Quinn McCammon after Shiro. And it's
I mean,
great Wayne Cashman, who is never belonged on an NHL bench, at least as a head coach.
Watch Roger Nielsen. Did he get fired in the end? I know he got sick.
No, he got fired when he got sick because Craig Ramsey came in.
Took over.
And took over and did a good job. Then he got fired.
And then he got fired.
Was it Bill Barber after that?
Yeah, and then he got fired
against Bill Barber.
And then they fired Barber.
Then they bring in Hitchcock.
Yes, and then they fired Hitchcock eventually as well.
They fired Hitchcock and brought in John Stevens.
I think it was John Stevens,
and then it was Laviolette.
And then they fired
John Stevens baked the cake. Remember that? Remember John Stevens baked a cake when they were winning?
Oh man, I forget that.
He had his players bake a cake. It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen a coach talk about. He had no personality. Yeah, we baked a cake. We're building something.
He was definitely,
he's a monotone. He's really the most boring guy in the world.
I honestly think the team had the most personality under Laviolette.
No, I would definitely
play with some jam. That whole, I would say.
That crew with the Hitchcock, when you had Recchi and Roenick. Yes. I love Roenick. Roenick was such a character.
That was
Primo and a lot of those veterans that were like one of the last.
Gagne. I remember that top line of Primo, Gagne, and Recchi. That was awesome.
You watch those games and you long for those. Look at all those veterans.
Yeah,
they're cramming the gym in the net. They're playing with desperation.
They were good though too. They were good. Yeah. Like, they had good. Like, they would go out and they would get a guy who'd be like their number 5 defenseman, and even he was good. And they would go in it. Today it's just like, I think it's so important that this team find the right coach. I don't know if we're going to finish this season with Yo or whatever happens. But
What do you guys think in terms of that? Like, who would you want to see out of all the available candidates? Would you want to see?
I wanted Gallant.
Yeah,
I
Gallant
wanted
would have been
Gerard
great.
Gallant. I
But
was very
out
upset.
of right now, I mean, we have
Julian,
rumored, yeah, Julian, Talkett,
Quinn.
Montgomery, Quinn. Uh, who would you guys want to see out of that troop? Do you think?
Obviously, we said Talkett. I don't know who else.
You,
Torts.
you know what? It depends on what direction they're going in. If they're going to rebuild this thing and they're going to say to Claude Giroux, listen, man, we're going to rebuild. And what do you want to do? And he decides like, well, I'm not up for this. If Claude is out the door because he says he agrees to a trade and they're really doing a rebuild and they're going to pick 5 or 6 guys and everybody else is a candidate to leave, then I'm going to want a different coach than from the guy who's going to try to salvage what they have now. That's 2 different kind of coaches for me.
What direction do you think they're going to go in, though? Because I personally don't see them going the rebuild route until Fletcher's fired, in my opinion.
I would agree with that.
I think they're going to try to salvage and try to win now. And then once that doesn't happen and Fletcher's gone, then they're going to go that rebuild avenue. But at this point, I think they're going to really try to make the playoffs this year, see what they have. And then if Fletcher's still around, he's going to try to add more in free agency, get rid of JVR and try to go at it again, in my opinion.
Boy, I tell you. I
think they should probably go the other way if you really look at dynamic.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think it's over. I think the original sin was Hextall not doing it. And that's what they should have done. They should have tore it down and got more cracks at higher level players instead of drafting on average at 15 or something. They would have been drafting on average at 5, a couple of times. And even when they had a chance at a couple of those players. Obviously, they struck out with Nolan Patrick and
what they could have had last night with Makar.
Yeah. I mean, I would have been happy with Heiskanen or Pettersson too. I mean, Heiskanen is a dynamite player. He's not as offensively, flashy, but he's so solid. And he's another guy, Yariv, that is a standalone defenseman.
But he has a lot of help.
Yeah, but he's really, really good.
But he's got a lot of help.
He thinks the game a lot better.
If Provorov was here with a chemo team in this entire time, do you think they would be ripping on Provorov the same way?
Well, let's put it this
or
way.
Even Ryan Ellis.
Provorov would not be making as many mistakes, but there still are fundamental problems with his handle. He's really robotic on a power play. He does not belong on the power play. He's not a dynamic player in that situation.
They put him on the power play because they're scared of shorthanded goals.
I understand. And I think Ryan Ellis.
That's my opinion.
They think, Risto would be a better choice, but Risto's a wild card. They don't want that kind of volatility. But I could see Ryan Ellis being a solution there. Ryan Ellis is not super dynamic, but he gets pucks through. He's smart. He has better vision. I think that'd be a better way to go. But to answer your question, getting back to Provorov is a fundamentally flawed player who could play better, who's good enough to be in a first pair and handle minutes because he's such a physical dynamo and such a talented guy, a power skater and all that. But he's limited. He's got a ceiling. He's not a standalone first pair defenseman. And yes, I'll say Heiskanen is. And I will say that they have a decision to make with regard to getting back to the original question of the coaches. To me, it's a bifurcation. Yes, I would rather have a rebuild. I don't think they're going to do it because I agree with Vasili, but because I think they want that revenue, and they think short term, and they think about all the losses they've had since the pandemic. So I think they would be open for a guy like Trotz. They would be actually open to a coach like Tortorella, because Tortorella is going to get, over the short term at least, is going to get more out of the players. I wouldn't want to see it because I'd rather have a guy like Talkett that could handle like a retool or rebuild where he keeps the players like Provorov, whoever is going to be here, on an even keel as they go through a transition, because I think he can do that.
Yeah, I think Vasili nailed it, though. I don't think, because think about it, we could, if we were going to go the rebuilding route, it would have been a very easy route to do that without the moves that Chuck Fletcher has made.
Yeah, if we would have pivoted last offseason instead of adding the players that he did.
Right. Adding the salary that he did. Now, I don't think we're in a position where we're screwed. but I do think that, he's not making those moves. I do think the Flyers have enough young talent in the system that if they want to move up in the draft, that is possible as well. But it's going to take a price. Having said that, maybe that's the right move too. Like if you want to go and get a dynamic center, you got your first round picks. You have a bunch of young players, maybe it's time. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's time to throw something at it, not like the Eric Lindros era. Not saying there's another Eric Lindros out there, but it probably won't cost as much either, but maybe it's worth trying to get a top 5 pick. That's a guy who's a center if you believe in him and go for it. I mean, you mentioned the Jack Eichel thing. I mean, it would cost less than Jack Eichel probably. So, it's probably worth thinking about, at a certain point, if you are going to go that route. I don't expect that to happen. I really don't. But I will say this. If they do bring in a coach and you don't see anything else, I think Chuck Fletcher is not stupid. And if you look at the stuff that he's done what we wanted a little later than when we wanted it. So realistically, I think they would wait the season out. If they don't see what they see, we'll see pieces move to the trade deadline. And then we are in for some kind of retooling, rebuilding call, whatever you want.
It's kind of crazy because if they bring in another coach, let's say, or even if, they let Yo kind of play it out till the end of the season, they want to do more of a bigger evaluation of like the team in general and what kind of coach they want to fit the mold of the future and the way they're going. The trade deadline could really be a big fire sale, which is kind of crazy to think. Like you could have Giroux going, Braun going, Martin Jones going. He's on a 1-year deal, I believe. Risto going. So it's actually crazy to think that 7-8 guys could be on their way out, even Yandel.
You buy out JVR, who's got $5 million left on his contract at the end of the year.
It's really a pivot point.
Horrible.
It's really a pivot point in terms of the organization where they are right now and where are they going to go in the future based on these next few months and what happens. And it's crazy that, to think that I don't know if the management and the upper management in general are collectively on the same page on what they want to do with that. And that is an issue too, because in order to succeed, you have to have a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish. And I don't know if the Flyers really have that right now.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, please, Isaiah. No.
I was going to say they look like they're in reactive mode right now, which is not a good situation. But you have to keep in mind also, generally speaking, I don't know what's going to happen with this organization. Generally speaking, general managers get to hire 2 coaches. So
you're absolutely right.
You can be damn sure that if he does bring in a guy, it's going to be someone he really wants because he knows that he's going to be on the clock. He might be on the clock now for all we know. I know Carchidi put out an article now that look for for Fletcher to be on the clock right now. That's fair to say.
Shouldn't he be?
Yeah.
Well, look at the team. Like I said earlier, that these pieces don't really look like they fit. Of course, they fit a lot better when you have good breakout passes. Everybody looks better when you get the puck out of his zone. There's no doubt about it. I think Keith Jones was talking about how fast the Flyers looked when Ryan Ellis was in the lineup. Yeah. Did everybody look faster? No, they're hitting everybody in stride. Which I understand. But I think that everything should be on the table when you've been mediocre or you've sucked for this long, and now we're encroaching and starting to getting to the point where now we're talking about 3 really bad years out of 4. And that says, this is who we are, baby. It's 20 was the outlier. This is not the outlier.
And 20, while it was a very successful season and they looked excellent on their way to the playoffs, they didn't look amazing to start the year either. So it's not like the entire season they were that team. So
and then you had it shortened to COVID. So who knows really what would have unfolded and if it would have been a hot.
You would think by now they would have been able to recapture some of that magic, especially considering some of these young players you would think would take another, get to another level. Farabee's really the only one that's taken his game to that point.
That's where I worry about the coaching, because I'm like, all of the players are struggling. Like all of the young players are struggling. Yeah. Like all of them, they did well before they got here.
That's why your team construction is so important. Pieces need to fit. Remember, in a capped world, it's rationed resources, and you have to keep those, you have to put together a team very carefully.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk about one last player before we close it up here. I do want to talk about Wade Allison. I do believe he is slated to play very soon.
I think this weekend, maybe in the
NHL. He is the healthiest he's been. Fingers crossed that he stays healthy. I do think he'll obviously play for the Phantoms for a little bit before he does get called up, but he is an NHL player. He is a guy that the team, quite frankly, has missed the elements that he brings. He's got a big, heavy shot. He's a physical player. He's got great energy. He's a guy. He's kind of like McEwen in the energy department, but has a lot more skill. So could be a nice addition, but I think overall just really needs to stay healthy. And obviously losing Lazinski already for the year. The Flyers they're just decimated by injuries at so many levels this year, unfortunately. But what do you guys think about Allison? Do you think he will make it back up with the Flyers soon if he stays healthy? Do you think the Flyers will kind of insert him into that top 9 or bottom 6? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I would definitely say that we're going to see Allison up sooner rather than later. Especially with the injury to Joel Farabee. I mean, there's a spot open there. I mean, There's no argue that he's, a better fit stylistically and just talent-wise than Max Willman. So I think as soon as they, see him get some games under his belt and doesn't re-aggravate anything injury-wise, that we'll see him up here. And even yesterday, Cam Atkinson left the game for a bit with some block shots. He looks a bit banged up. So I think we'll see Allison up. And he's somebody that, could, spark the team, could inject some life into them. He really drives the net, which is something that they've been lacking. You're supposed to have a couple players that do that, like a JVR and connecting, but we haven't really seen it too often, especially with JVR. So hopefully maybe you get Allison in there, he sparks something, just, some younger blood into the team, obviously. They do have, a bunch of veterans, still some young guys, but I like the way Allison plays. He competes every night. He tries really hard out there. You can tell, and he has a wicked shot. So in terms of power play, he could probably help too. Who's more than a perfect player to put in that bumper spot? On the power play with a shot like his, you might as well try it, right? So.
Yep. Isaiah, what do you think?
Well, he certainly is not a guy who's shy about getting to the net, and that's one of the things he did very well last year. That being said, this is a guy who didn't even have a training camp. Yeah. So my concern is that I don't want him to get out there as being already a guy who gets hurt a lot. I want to give him a good solid 3 weeks down in AHL to make sure he has his conditioning, because I don't want him to come back from what appeared to be a high ankle sprain or something like that, which is a really tough injury, to either re-aggravate that or just overcompensate for not being in the best condition, and then go through the whole thing with sports hernia, groin, hip, any of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So with a guy who's had those kind of issues, I just want to, make sure, double sure that he's okay and that his conditioning is where it needs to be. Other than that, hey, turn him loose in the top 9 as soon as he is ready to go.
Yeah.
So he fits right in, and then the fourth line, then you start kind of putting people where they belong and slotting players where they belong. And that's probably one of the other big issues with the Flyers. Even if the pieces don't fit together great, the slotting right now is poor because of injuries right now as well.
People are playing above the positions they should be in.
That's it.
Yep. Exactly. And I think, we were talking about JVR, which again, it's such a shame because he started off last year so strong. And if he played even 80% of that this year, he'd be so much more effective. It seems to me like Allison would probably start taking his role out of the lineup.
JVR. I just have this if you have this, thought bubble of him handing like a letter to the mailman, because he's just mailing it in, man. I don't know what he's doing out there,
Yeah.
You think, it looks like they even put him with Giroux, to spark him in a sense, because they've always had chemistry in the past. But even last night, it was more like Frost and Giroux are dragging him around the ice versus him really controlling.
I don't get it. Like he looks like completely invisible.
Yeah, a shell of his former self. It might just be you know what I mean? Every player is different in terms of whether they're going to decline. He's 33 years old. This could just be I mean, he's been a power forward,
But
quote unquote. This
so
could just be
weird.
it for him.
Yeah, but it's so weird because he looked so good last year, especially
That's
the first half.
That's
And
the crazy thing, though.
the skill set that he has, it's kind of like a boxer who has a punch. It's like the last thing that goes is punch. You would think the last thing that would go with a guy like JVR is his reflex, at least to be able to tip a shot or put back a rebound. That
Fight
is not
in front of the net.
right. And there's not
Look at
a
Corey
like,
Perry.
wide range of skill set along a spectrum. You know what I mean? So it doesn't. I don't get it. Something else is going on. I don't know.
The only thing I could think about is maybe he is one of the players who got affected the most by the coaching staff. Like maybe they were pretty harsh on him. Like, you know what I mean? Because he's never been an aggressive guy. Never.
Yeah,
he's never
sure.
been an aggressive guy. And I could see that maybe them just ripping into him.
We'll see
you know?
maybe if Yo can get more out of him. It's going to be
Yeah.
interesting.
I
He's
mean,
got to have to score.
Because
He has to score at some point. He has, 2 goals this season? That's
I mean,
such-
my thing, if he does not rebound this year, they can't move him. Even with the $5 million in cash and $7 million in cap hit, they have to buy him out. You're not trading a first round pick to get rid of him.
No,
You're not
no.
trading another. We don't even have a second round pick to get rid of him next year. You have to buy him out. It would be a shame, but at least his contract is structured where it's a $5 million cash deal, so it's not too bad. It should be like 1.5 a year or whatever. But it's nothing we need. But it's like he's unmovable.
I think it's a real possibility if he doesn't rebound that like you see him bought out in the offseason for sure.
It's really interesting is that
See him retire.
Hextall had the opportunity to get Paul Stastny, didn't want to give him an extra year. And at the time, I'm like, yeah, I guess I understand that. But boy, what Paul Stastny would have been for the Flyers the last few years, huh?
We needed a center desperately
Exactly.
too, right? Over a winger.
How would the team have looked essentially?
And
if you
I
had
think
him
what did they
spot
offer Stastny? I think it was 2 years at $8 million or something, and they didn't
Yeah,
want to give him the
4
3
million.
years.
It was
I
that
don't-
extra year that he wanted. And it's
Yeah.
like, that guy's been, I mean, when he's been traded because people really wanted him. It
Yeah.
wasn't, he's a
still
pro's
looks good on
pro.
Winnipeg. He still looks good on Winnipeg right now.
Yeah,
as
I
a
know.
third center.
I know.
So,
Another Hextall winner.
Yeah, I really want to see if we can find the right coach for this team, and at least start to understand why like JVR is not like, okay, I could see him being a 40-point player, right?
Yeah.
And even that I would say is like an average year for him. But on the pace he's at, you're talking about like 20 points this year. You're talking about a guy who's like
for
literally
$7 million,
not going to hit 10 goals. Like he's just not doing anything. He just looks completely invisible.
I mean,
And the amount of guys that I've seen regress this year, it's very concerning. And I really want to see if a coach can get them out of this because it's
it'll be
baffling.
interesting.
It's baffling.
I'm hoping we get Talkett in there because I really think that his strategies and just how he coached that Arizona team a few years ago to the playoffs, who barely had like any talent on the team, just speaks volumes to that he can get a lot out of his players. But
we all wanted Rod Brindamore, and one of the reasons you want Rod Brindamore is because his attitude reflects on the rest of the team, and that is a guy with a ridiculous work ethic. Can Talkett do that for the Flyers? That's what I would look for.
He could be similar in that sense.
I would hope so.
But we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of candidates. What do you guys think? Are we feeling the win streak or the losing streak, is getting broken on Wednesday against the Devils?
I do think that. And I do want to go back to a quick little memory. The last time the Flyers...
Okay.
Sorry, I'll tell you this. Last time the Flyers lost 10 in a row is when Craig Berube took over for Laviolette. And who did they beat to stop their losing streak? The New Jersey Devils, 1-0. And they actually had just as bad of a power play, just as low scoring. I think it was 1.4 goals a game they were doing at the time. So it's very similar eerily to what's happening. It was an assistant coach who I think Craig Berube ran the defense, if I remember correctly, as well. So not that different from what we're going. And maybe Lappy was on the bench at the time too.
Maybe.
Yeah.
He blocked the shot once with
They've lost 4 in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Devils. I think I saw a stat though saying the Devils, Islanders, and Flyers were like 3-18 and like 2 or something in their last like handful of games combined, which bottom of the Metro's looking good. That's for sure.
I will say
and the Islanders are winning tonight, unfortunately. So the Trotz Bowl is not going well for the Flyers.
Sorry,
3-1
Whit.
after 2.
Sorry, Whit. It's interesting because if the Flyers do bottom out this year, this would be the first time, and I don't think that'll happen in the end, by the way, but this would be the first time that they actually bottom out in a year that the draft is strong.
Yeah, I know, right?
That has not happened to them. Typically, when they're really bad, it's like oddly
I'll
weaker
take Pat
draft.
Kane though. I mean, they got screwed out of Pat Kane.
Yeah.
So,
They got
I mean,
screwed out.
that's a Hall of Famer.
JVR, of
That's
course.
what I mean. You got to think about all those draft situations where they should have been picking higher. Like, it would only be fair if, let's say, they bottomed out and somehow got the first pick magically. But that's wishful thinking.
You never really know, though. I mean, even the Eric
Yeah.
Lindros trade that I was referring to. I mean, we traded Peter Forsberg
For him.
and like $15 million, and Mike
Ron
Ricci,
Hextall,
Ron
Mike,
Hextall,
Duchesne,
Steve
all
Duchesne.
of these guys,
Chris
for
Simon.
Eric Lindros. Having said that, while I do think Peter Forsberg is very close to Eric Lindros, Lindros is still like one of the best players.
One of a generational talent for sure.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's wrap it up here. We're actually at 2 hours. So this
Wow.
is the longest episode I've done in a long time. But I kind of had a feeling this would happen. Vasili, I'll let you go first. Anything you want to tell people? Anything you're working on?
Yeah,
any updates?
should have an article coming out at some point this week. So you guys can catch that on flyersnittygritty.com, where you can catch, a ton of other great content. We always have writers putting stuff up every single day. And you guys can follow me on Twitter at flyerit up. So it was nice to be on, Yariv. I appreciate it.
Yeah, obviously another successful episode, and you can definitely fire AV twice for us. Thank you. Isiah, anything you want to let the listeners know about?
Yeah, well, we couldn't have a show this week, so it's really nice for you to have me on to kind of express, our opinions. The OMB people got a couple guys on the road, so we couldn't make it. So next week we'll have a show. You can follow the OMB podcast at OMB Puck. At OMB Puck. We're gonna have a show. We might have a panel. If not this week, next week. Next week, the following week. And you can follow me at Isiah, ISAIAH_520. That's Isiah. Don't forget the _520 on Twitter. We have a Facebook page and all kinds of different platforms. You can check out the OMB podcast. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Isiah. I really appreciate it. Actually, great idea hitting me up. I think this was absolutely an awesome episode. And I don't know. It was a good one. I really enjoyed this one. I hope
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share this out. It is a humongous help when you guys do that. Please comment. I do read all of the comments, even if I don't respond. I still read it. I promise you, I read every single one. Not like I get a billion of them or whatever, but I definitely try to read everything you guys write to me. But thank you again. I hope you're all not suffering too much. Enjoy the season while you can, and hopefully, things are looking up from here. Remember, always stay gritty.